All perpetrators of violence, Israeli or Palestinian, must be held accountable. Recent dangerous and provocative acts and statements are further inflaming the situation. Statements by Palestinian armed groups calling for further violence and attacks against Israelis are unacceptable and must cease. The recent inflammatory acts and statements by an Israeli minister at the holy sites in Jerusalem add to an already explosive situation in the occupied West Bank. And the status quo at the holy sites in Jerusalem must be respected and upheld, recognizing the special and historic role of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan as custodian of the holy sites in Jerusalem. Mr. President, with every passing day, we get further away from the objective of ending the occupation and achieving a viable two-state solution. We remain convinced that durable peace will only be achieved when Israel and an independent, democratic, contiguous, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state live side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders on the basis of the pre-1967 lines, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. It is our responsibility to do all we can to support the parties in reaching that objective.
We welcome the local humanitarian pauses, which have enabled the launch of the emergency polio vaccination, again, as Under Secretary General DiCarlo highlighted, and recognize the colossal efforts of human health actors to carry out the campaign in a very challenging environment. The Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator met with the highest government levels of the government of Israel yesterday on humanitarian concerns, including the importance of the polio campaign. According to World Health Organization, over 187,000 children under the age of 10 have been vaccinated in the first phase of the campaign, towards the goal of reaching more than 640,000 children in the coming period. UNRWA is playing a vital role, including with over 200 teams operating in its clinics and health points. We also welcome the repair of the main water line between Israel and Khan Yunis by local partners in cooperation with UNICEF. While the water and sanitation situation in Gaza remains dire, the repair has restored water services in several areas, including Al-Mawasi, where hundreds of thousands of displaced people endure unbearable conditions. Despite all the challenges, we remain on the ground in Al-Mawasi and across Gaza, providing essential assistance, including food and shelter, and protection services as best as we can.
We received at Schneider 19 children, 6 mothers and 1 grandmother that were all in captivity. All of these children underwent unimaginable, horrific events when their closest relatives being murdered or taken with them to captivity. Children are innocent bystanders of any war. Sadly, children are known to be unintentionally hurt in many wars as innocent bystanders. This should always be avoided. It should never happen. But unintentional is very different than intentional. I simply cannot understand, cannot bear the thought that someone, a man, a woman, anyone, could intentionally murder and capture children, lock them, torture them, physically and mentally, on purpose, intentionally. I'm here today as an Israeli pediatric physician and head of one of the leading pediatric centers in the world to tell you no child should ever go through what the children and civilians of Israel have gone through on October 7th.
I thank Ms. Novak for her briefing.
In the criminal Hamas-led attack on October 7th, 1,200 Israelis were killed and 250 taken hostages. Since that day, I and every Israeli I know have been living in deep fear. Our government is cynically exploiting our collective trauma to violently advance its project of cementing Israel's control over the entire land. To do that, it is waging war on the entire Palestinian people, committing war crimes almost daily. In Gaza, this has taken the form of expulsion, starvation, killing, and destruction on an unprecedented scale. This goes beyond revenge. Israel is using the opportunity to promote an ideological agenda, making Gaza inhabitable.
Today, I want to speak to the many, many people living in agony. That includes hostages that remain in the hands of Hamas, hailing from across the world, including the United States. We're doing all we can to bring these Americans home and all the hostages home to their families. The 6 hostages killed this weekend were executed at the same time negotiators were discussing the names of individuals to be released in a ceasefire deal. It calls into question the sincerity of Hamas negotiators, and it reveals yet again the ugly truth about the vile, depraved ideology that Hamas represents, from its massacre of 1,200 people to its weaponization of sexual violence. These latest murders confirm that Hamas is a terrorist organization. I know some members of this council won't acknowledge that, but that's the simple truth. No member of this council would tolerate their citizens being taken hostage and murdered, not a single one of us. The United States strongly condemns Hamas's brutality. It is long, long past time this council do the same.
Give the floor to the representative of the United States of America.
Thank you.
Внимательно выслушали докладчиков от гражданского общества. Из их выступлений понятно, что нынешний виток обострения палестино-израильского конфликта приобретает все более мрачные и уродливые очертания. Мы все были потрясены, узнав о гибели в Нусайрате 6 заложников, включая российского гражданина Александра Лобанова. Выражаем глубокие соболезнования семьям и родственникам погибших. Подобным действиям нет и не может быть оправдания. Мы говорили об этом с самого начала. Мы также с самого начала призывали приоритизировать вопрос освобождения заложников, добиться которого, как мы все прекрасно понимаем, возможно только в случае немедленного прекращения огня в Газе.
In recent days, Israel has killed over 30 Palestinians in the West Bank. Among them, 6 children and 2 elderly people. It has destroyed refugee camps and civilian infrastructure, and besieged and attacked hospitals and carried out countless airstrikes. Jenin is a vivid example. The number of Palestinians killed in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, since last October stands at around 700, including over 150 children, with the number of injuries at 6,000 people. Over 3,300 Palestinians have been displaced, and over 12,000 people have been arbitrarily detained. Hostages endured a never-ending nightmare. In parallel, Israel is advancing its settler colonial agenda, with more and more settlers installed and more Palestinians displaced. Violence by settlers and soldiers is spreading like wildfire to push people out of their homeland. Israel wants you to believe its military aggression is about security, but it knows by experience that it is actually creating the conditions of insecurity. No one is naive enough to ignore what this is about. It is about the land. All Palestinians are guilty of being Palestinians and for wanting to live on their land, the land of their ancestors. Their sentence: ethnic cleansing, apartheid, arbitrary detention, or death. How long will they have to suffer such a terrifying fate?
Mia Regev, another freed hostage, has testified that every woman held by Hamas has been sexually abused. Every single one. She testified, every woman there experiences some form of sexual harassment. It doesn't matter how you try to beautify or change it. Mia was held for 50 days, but there are women who have been held for much longer. Women who have suffered this torture for almost a year. Women who have been forgotten by the international community. And then there is Agam Goldstein Almog, who was held in a terror tunnel when she was 17 years old, after witnessing the murder of her father and older sister. In that tunnel, she encountered 6 other female hostages. These women told her how they were molested by armed men who entered the room where they were showering. Agam herself was told by a guard that she would live the rest of her life as a chained slave wife in Gaza. Now is the time for action. Now is the time for the Security Council to adopt a clear and unequivocal resolution. This doesn't require long negotiations. This doesn't require deliberation. You have a moral obligation to adopt a simple resolution which would say the Security Council condemns Hamas, their atrocities, designates them as a terrorist organization, and demands the immediate release of the hostages. Disconnect between the horrific reality of October 7th, the massacre, the abductions, and the current situation in Gaza is difficult to comprehend. Many seem to have forgotten why we started this war, why we are fighting now in Gaza. But we have not. We remember the faces, we remember the families, and we will not forget them. The disconnection allows some to behave as if October 7th never happened, as though there are no hostages in Gaza now. Babies, young girls suffering in the hands of Hamas. Today, I will remind the Council and the world that we will never forget them.